Okay, so then, without any further ado, I'm very proud to call the Prime Minister to open the debate. Woo!
Just a second, I'll start now. So, at the beginning of this debate, it's really important to say that if we introduce this policy, that doesn't mean that suddenly every country will have nuclear weapons. That means that every country, if they think it's good for them, can try to develop it. Not everyone will develop it because they wouldn't have enough money or enough experts in the field to be able to develop nuclear weapons. We think that countries who are that are small and that feel under threat have the right to defend themselves better. Why is that? Because those countries probably don't have enough conventional weapons to be able to compete in this field with larger forces as America, Russia, or China. So this is their option to, if they feel under threat, to protect themselves and their citizens. For example, if you're small woman and you feel under threat of someone attacking you in the street, you can buy pepper spray to make you feel safer. That doesn't mean that you will suddenly go down the street and start spraying everyone in the face. That just means that if the moment comes that someone attacks you, you will have a weapon to defend yourself and protect yourself. We think that the same analogy can be applied here because, for example, nowadays larger powers like United States have a large influence in this field because they want to impose their views on on those smaller countries. So they want to remain strongest, and they don't want to allow anyone they don't want even to give them a chance to become strong enough in order for them to because if they become strong enough, they wouldn't have the power to control them. Nowadays, they can threat them that they will introduce sanctions to to those countries and so on. So. As I said, those small countries don't have enough conventional weapons, and nowadays they can develop nuclear weapons either. So it is important to explain why weapons matter, especially when it comes to nuclear weapons. Those weapons are really they're not likely to be actually used on anyone. For example, it will never happen in the time that America attacks Russia, because there is a possibility of mutual assured destruction. That means that if America, for example, throws a nuclear bomb on Russia, then Russia will throw their nuclear bombs on America, and basically they have enough weapons to destroy whole planet with that. That only thing why countries are developing nuclear weapons, and why so much money is given to that field, is for their citizens to feel safer, and also to defend themselves from enemies that enemies don't have incentive to attack them, and to even try to. No one wants to risk to attack that country. So basically. Another thing why those weapons are developed is because, for example, if one country stops developing those weapons, then they risk that other countries will develop some weapon that is stronger than any that we now know, and will use it to destroy everyone else, and no one would have a chance to stop that country from becoming a superpower. So we say that if we introduce this policy, this would lead to nuclear weapons to be more regulated. What that means? That means that there is we don't we say that what can happen is that some country tries to like misuse those weapons, because nowadays you can go as a country, you can't go and attack some other country without other forces interfering and stopping you from doing so. So we say that this won't happen with nuclear weapons. This will only defend those small countries and their citizens, that will start to feel more safe, and uh, that will have this country making their own choices and not having anyone imposing their views onto them. I will take okay, closing. Do you have any questions? Okay, I will take opening.
Would the opening government feel safer in a world where every nation had a nuclear weapon?
Can you repeat? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Would the opening government feel safer in a world where every nation had a nuclear weapon?
Well, as I said in the beginning, that basically cannot happen. The thing that where everyone is develops same amount of nuclear weapon can happen. If everyone develops nuclear weapons, that will be the same like no one like if no one has it, because if everyone has it, no one can take advantage of nuclear weapons. So we don't think that world where everyone has it would make a lot of difference. So to sum this up, we say that this can be used as a self-defense mechanism, especially when countries are small and larger forces want to take advantage of them, and we don't think that this will lead to misuse of those weapons. So for all those reasons, I'm really proud to propose this motion.
Woo! I'd like to thank the speaker and call upon the leader of the opposition.
Firstly, let's start on some points on rebuttal on OG. Firstly, they say, well, not everybody will have a nuclear weapon because not everybody has the experts. But what OG also has to defend, even though this is an unlikely scenario, that it would be okay if everyone did, even though it is unlikely. Because principally, their claim says it is okay to have nuclear weapons and the states have a right to it. So it would be all right for OG to live in a world where every state has a nuclear weapon. Secondly, they say, oh, well, who are we protecting here? We are protecting small countries that don't have enough weapons to protect themselves. Notice how they're explicitly clashing with themselves when they say, oh, people don't have enough experts, but the small countries will somehow have enough experts and enough money to develop this extremely complex and extremely expensive program that requires years of study from actual experts. But these small countries are the ones being protected. We're thinking, firstly, no, these countries are unlikely to develop them. Who is likely to use these weapons is the big countries. It's USA, it's Russia, it's France, it's possibly some other countries who are very militaristic, but usually it's going to be small militaristic countries such as North Korea, or big militaristic countries and big like giants that are actually superpowers like the USA and Russia. So this is not protecting the small countries that OG has put in their framing. Secondly, OG is totally ignoring that we live in the 21st century, and we do have treaty pacts that are much more effective at protecting you as a nation than nukes are. And thirdly, even if these nations were so inclined to have a nuke, and even if what OG is saying is true and these small nations can now protect themselves because, I don't know, Montenegro has a nuke now, even if Montenegro tried to defend themselves with this nuke and they actually try to fire a nuke to, use it if somebody calls them on their bluff of having a nuke, and they try to nuke basically any other country in the world, they would get destroyed within a day because every single country would be at war with them. Or at least the countries that they're trying to nuke. And let's be honest, Montenegro couldn't win a war against anybody. Further than that, they say, oh, the big countries don't want these little countries to have nukes. Well, this is not what big countries rely upon when asserting their dominance. The USA does not dominate only the world that are nuke free. The USA is a superpower that dominates on the size of its army, on the size of its economic policies, on the size of its international influence, and not only if you have a nuke or not. Furthermore, they say, oh, these weapons are unlikely to be used. We're telling you, well, even if they are unlikely to be used, they give you the point of psychological warfare. They put you in a position where you are psychologically superior to other nations because you can destroy them. And we'll get to that further later in my speech. After that, they say, oh, nukes make you feel safe. We'd like to note that this claim is absolutely not true. Nukes aren't what makes you feel safe. That can be done by the military. The military is a defending force, a force that can put a line on defense on your borders, that can protect from invasion, that can protect your people and not attack other people's to make you feel safer, because that's not how safety works, unless you can totally destroy a different country. And the army also has other implications that are useful, because the nuke won't help you in a situation of a flood or an earthquake, but the army just might. And after that, they also go into an absurd mental leap, saying, oh, if we all stop and only one country has them, they basically win the game of world. Well, they don't, because you have NATO, you have the UN, you have all kinds of treaties, and this country that even if it was the only one with nukes, would still probably lose this war against everybody else, even though they have conventional means. So let's get to our case. Basically, the difference between nukes and regular weapons is that the point of nuclear weapons is mutually assured destruction, and it is mass destruction and psychological warfare, whereas conventional weapons can be used for defense, even though they can be used for attack, but they can also be used to defend somebody that is attacking you. These weapons are directly in conflict with the Geneva Convention, where we've also put such weapons as mustard gas and as other weapons that are weapons of mass destruction. This is why they are not acceptable, because they cause an enormous loss of life in a very short time. From OO, we believe that we should work on disarmament and nuclear defense rather than nuclear proliferation and making more nuclear weapons. And we believe that the world currently is turning to diplomacy. You can witness this by seeing the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, by the UN, by all other organizations that we formed that are economic and military pacts, where we are showing that we are more likely to sit in a round table and discuss what our problems are, rather than try to proliferate our nuclear arsenal to potentially destroy a different nation. Because that is the only thing a nuclear weapon does. You can destroy somebody else in hopes that they won't destroy you back. Well, they fucking will. Even if only they have conventional means, they will still attack you with those conventional means. And you are still gaining loss of life on your own citizens by trying to nuke somebody else. Also, what we would like to OG to note is that nukes aren't a binary status. You aren't either, oh, I have a nuke or I don't have a nuke. It also matters how many nukes you have. Because even if a certain country would develop one nuke, they still couldn't stand up to USA, which directly clashes because the USA has thousands of nukes, and this directly clashes with OG's claims. So, furthermore, what we'd like to bring to you from OG, even though it is a bit late, and time management's obviously not my strong suit, is that this puts a nation into a position of power. It creates a factor of tension in international diplomacies, and it does further nuclear proliferation, just as OG claims. Because if one nation has it, then other nations will also like to have it. This is where we only further the point of nuclear weapons, and we are pushing towards a world where everybody has it, where somebody just might be crazy enough, like Kim Jong-un, to use it and to start this nuclear chain reaction where we can destroy the whole world in an instant. And if OG has rightfully claimed that the world where everybody has nukes is the same as a world where nobody has nukes. And from the opposition, we would much rather see a world where nobody has nukes. Thank you.
Woo. I'd like to thank the speaker and call upon the Deputy Prime Minister.
Okay, just a second. Okay. So first of all, I want to talk about what the opposition said. So they said the nuclear weapons doesn't make you safe. What makes you safe is your military. But they never explained to us how this military works. First of all, military works as if you have good weapons, your military is good. It also depends on the personnel. But as we go into 21st century, the technology and the weapons that this military possess is a crucial thing. And when you have a nuclear weapon, this betters your military greatly. And the small nations that we talk about can't defend themselves just through their personnel. And we as a government think that the nuclear weapon as a means of as it has a great destructive power will benefit your military, and it will make your people feel much more safer, because that's how military work. Second, they talked about what that small countries won't be able to make these weapons. We explained to you why small countries won't have the incentive to make them. We never said that they won't be able to make them. This is a very crucial difference, because we in our case told you that who will make these weapons are the countries that don't feel safe, that they feel that their way of life is threatened, and that they feel that they are under attack. And we drew analogy with self-defense as a means when some women or stuff like that, when they are attacked. No, when they are attacked, they can buy weapons to protect themselves. Because it will make them feel much more safer. But they are a rational person, and they won't go attacking everybody with that weapon. They won't be going through the streets and I don't know spraying their spray on people. They will just use it when the attacker is there and when their life is in a big threat. And this is really important, because we must give these people a means to protect themselves. And the opposition told you that we need to protect the world, the world where everybody has nuclear weapons, and this is really not true. We just need to defend the statement that everybody has a right for a nuclear weapon, that everybody has a right to protect themselves. So when we talk about this, this really doesn't stand. So first, they talked about that in their case. They talked about that nuclear weapons are only a means of destroying, that they are only a mean to attack other countries and stuff like that. This is really not true, because we explained in our case why they won't be used as much. And here are some reasons why they won't be used as, I don't know, Kim Jong-un, a diabolical leader that is really evil and he will destroy everybody. First of all, these people still have an incentive to stay in power. As the opposition conceded that if they use this weapon, they will be destroyed. They will be wiped out from the face of this earth by other nations that are involved. So if they use this weapon, they will be destroyed. The people that are in power want to stay in power. So when they talk about this, they need to understand that these people don't have incentive to use this weapon. This is the first thing. The second thing is that people that live there don't want, okay, maybe not all of them, maybe there's a small group that hate those people so much, but the majority of people don't want to see they don't want to see tens or hundreds of thousands of people killed. They don't want to see them destroyed in an instant. These are some reasons why the people won't use them. These are some of the people why they won't use them, but they're much more likely to utilize them as a protective means, as a means of defending themselves, and this is where this psychological warfare begins. Because when you see somebody as when a bigger country sees somebody as able to protect themselves, it doesn't matter if they have one nuclear weapon, if they have 10 nuclear weapons, if they see them as just able to protect them, they are much more less likely to attack them. This doesn't mean that they need to have 100, I don't know, 1,000 nuclear bombs to win against America. But America knows if they attack them, they will suffer some casualties. They know that they will be in danger, and they're much more likely, much less likely to attack them. And this is why this psychological warfare is really important. I will take some questions if anybody has them. Okay, go closing.
What makes you think that authoritarian states in like Kim Jong-un can make a rational choice of choose not to use nukes in terms of self-defense? You can say.
But I already explained. It's really easy because they already probably have nuclear weapons, and they already understand they're rational beings. Here we can use our analogy as a self-defense. You know, if you're carrying a gun, if you live in America and you carry a gun on yourselves, you know that if you try to shoot somebody, if you are irrational, you will go to the prison, and no human being is going to do this, especially a human that is in charge of other people. Even though he is maybe a tyrant, even though he is maybe I don't know crazy and stuff like that, he also has the mechanisms of control. Even even the tyrant always has a fear of revolution, always has a fear of that other people are going to kill him because he's making irrational things, and he wants to stay in power, and he wants to utilize that power for the rest of his life. And this is why he won't just go into death like that, because he knows that as the opposition told you, if he does this is going to be a death sentence for him and his people, and he wants to stay in power, and he won't use nuclear weapons. So thank you. And based on this, we are happy to propose that everybody has the right to use for nuclear weapons as a means of protecting themselves. And thank you very much.
Woo! I'd like to thank the speaker and call upon the deputy leader of the opposition. Woo!
Have a need for nuclear weapons, because we don't have a need for big physical wars as we did before. We also shouldn't have right to make nuclear weapons. Second point would be about the purpose of weapons. Purpose of weapons primarily in status quo should be like defense. Nuclear weapons are everything but defense in a physical sense, which means if you have nuclear weapons in your country and someone attacks you, and someone might attack you even with a nuclear weapon, that doesn't mean anything for you, because you will be destroyed country, you will be attacked country, and also if you're a small country, there's a bigger chance that you won't even have any use of it. But what's the difference between the military and the actual nuclear weapons? If we have military can be used in other ways. First of all, it can be used for defense, as already Petar explained during his speech, but it can be used for helping in some catastrophes that are happening, such as earthquakes or big fires that are quite recently happening on the world. This is like the purpose of military that a country can use even when there isn't a war, and that's why having a military right now is more justified than having the nuclear weapons. As for nuclear weapons, they simply depend on getting into a war when using them and destroying the country completely. Also, another principle, these nuclear weapons can be used. As we already explained to you, they're not according to the Genova's agreement, they're not like appropriate for warfare and for the rules for warfare and laws that do exist, because these nuclear weapons are damaging and killing a mass amount of people. This means civilians will die if these weapons will be used. And in the history, we can see that these weapons were used. We saw that USA did actually use these weapons, so you cannot guarantee that these weapons won't be used by the major countries. No, thank you. In some time. And also
about practical problems. We have a problem with psychological warfare. Even though psychological warfare is not a physical one, it's still a warfare, which means that it creates tensions between countries. It creates insecurity for the citizens living in those countries. No, thank you. It creates this moment of being unsure whether you're safe in your country. Even if you have the nuclear weapon, the same, like just the thought of that any other country could also have nuclear weapon and could attack you with it is what makes you feel insecure. As I already said, the winner in this game is the one who attacks first, not the one who is defending themselves. So this is the problem with psychological warfare, and that's because that's why we believe that no country should have this right, because by having this right, you inherently damaging yourself and your own citizens if you are making, just a moment, making these weapons. Go ahead, PM.
Do you realize that you're defending status quo, and in status quo there are nuclear weapons? You say you would like to see the world without nukes, but that is not the option in this debate.
We're not actually debating on status quo, but we're debating on principles. I'm telling you that these countries that have nuclear weapons in status quo shouldn't have the right to have them, and it's principally wrong to have them. I had 4 points of why it's principally wrong in this current times for these countries to have these nuclear weapons. But these principles will be assured with the practical problems. So on to my next point that is different from psychological unfair. You have this insecurity that is happening, and because of this insecurity, you have a greater chance for these nuclear weapons to be misused. What am I meaning by this? If you look at it, Iran, it's not about nuclear weapons, but chemical ones, but it's like still the same principle, why they were rocketed by the USA. Because you can see that countries that aren't important for the country that has nuclear weapons and that is well developed, such as ones they do not trade with, like the countries of European Union, you can see that with some political figures, they can be misused. And we can see USA right now as the force that can misuse nuclear weapons. We can also see Kim Jong-un as a leader who can misuse nuclear weapons if he has them. Just because of the fact that these nuclear weapons often in these states depend on whether the leader is going to use them, we must not have the chance to use them at all. Thank you. Vote all.
I'd like to thank the speaker and call upon the member of government.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Let's focus on the most important point that everyone agrees on, is that nuclear weapons mean power. Countries with nuclear weapons are perceived differently on the global stage. USA, Russia, etc. having nuclear weapons give them power globally on aspects of economy, politics, etc. We believe that all states have the right to nuclear weapons, whether they want to develop it themselves or want to get it from other states. This way, global power won't be restricted on certain states, and so these countries wouldn't be the only who majorly controls global markets, politics, and affecting developing and also developed countries. When all states have the right to nuclear weapons, that will make them equal on the right of gaining power globally, so using nuclear weapons won't be a unique characteristic to specific countries. On the long term, that will give developed countries who have the potential to develop nuclear weapons the chance to be considered as of countries of power on the global stage, because they also have the power, have the right of nuclear weapons as other countries, and that will help such countries to contribute more in the markets and politics and like in the global stage in general, and that will help improve the global economy and distribute the power and not making like the power restricted to specific countries. So moving to refutations, when all states have the right to nuclear weapons, that wouldn't lead us to more of losses of lives as the government claimed, because look, like now we have countries who feel that they are threatened, and that makes states of nuclear weapon control them. But when we give the right to all, when we give all countries or all states the right to nuclear weapons, that will lead to more safety, because even if such threatened countries might not have the potential to develop nuclear weapons, they can seek to get it from other countries having them. So all states now have a way, and a very strong one, of protection that would prevent other countries from attacking them or even controlling them. Also, the government talked about that the massive change, the number or the quantity of nuclear weapons. Well, because we don't, here we're not talking about the quantity of nuclear weapons, the number of nuclear weapons that a state would have, because at all cases, nuclear weapons cause a massive damage in which lives, cities, institutes would be wasted, which is considered as a threat to any state on earth. We are not on a race of who have more nuclear weapons and will win in the end, because the minimum amount of nuclear weapons, having just the right to have nuclear weapons, either if you would develop it or get it from other states, that would cause a massive damage if you use it, that no state in the world would want. So yes, is there any questions? I don't know if someone raised a question. Okay, so I will just re-emphasize my points, which are that we are here focusing on that a nuclear having nuclear weapons, meaning having power. We don't want the nuclear power be restricted on specific countries that will make them, that will give them the chance to be the controllers of markets and the controls of politics around the world. We want that to be a right for everyone, so everyone have the right and the, to develop nuclear weapons or get it from other states, so everyone is equal from this side, and that would lead to a distribution of power globally, and also giving developed countries who have the potential to contribute more in global economy and politics the chance to contribute as much as other global powers that we have now. And thank you. I was proud to propose.
Woo. I'd like to thank the speaker and call upon the member of the opposition. Woo.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Just a second, I will put my timer on. Okay. I will explain you why having more nuclear weapons is bad for global security, and why it's bad even if we don't, like, if we have nuclear weapons but states still don't use it. So let us start with the global security. The proposition told us like that the states would feel themselves like more safe, but actually the global security would be diminished significantly, because if we are talking about giving the right to any state to possess nuclear weapon, we know that there are some dysfunctional states or dictatorships That means that there, when the decision is made, it's not made by parliament or by there are no checks and balances in these countries. That means that, like, if the country possesses nuclear weapon and there is a dictator who actually is the only one who takes decisions in this state, that means that the safety of people in the world would depend just on one person who is the leader of that country. So we are strongly against any kind of state to have the right for nuclear weapon, because this state might have lots of problems inside itself, like it might be not democratic state, and thus we threaten the lives of people in many other countries just by having the wrong decision of one person. Also, it increases the risks of terrorism, because like the more country, like if you have the undemocratic country, that means that there is corruption in this country. That means that for terrorists, it's easier to bribe some politicians, some military officers, and get access to nuclear weapons and use these nuclear weapons for terroristic purposes. Also, we believe that, like, the more states you have with nuclear weapon, the more risks are there actually for this nuclear weapon to be used. It's like, it's like if you have a highway with 6 cars on it, the chances of car crash are like little. But if you have a highway full of like cars, the chances of traffic accident are very high. So it's basically, it's always like that. The more risks you have, the more chances are there that this risk would actually come true. So the more countries would have the nuclear weapons, the more chances would be there that this nuclear weapon would be used. Also, like, even but I have to say that, like, at the moment, countries don't use a nuclear weapon against each other, because they know that, like, if you launch launch your rocket, the state you launch this rocket against would provide the opposite attack. So countries, even though they have like nuclear weapons, they don't use them. That means that states still would have to rely on other like traditional weapons, cybersecurity, or like economic pressure to influence each other. But let us imagine, so what still would be bad about the situation when countries have nuclear weapons but they don't use them? First of all, as our proposition said, like we are considering developing countries who can protect themselves. But as it was mentioned, if you are a developing country, you would have to spend lots of your budget on actually maintaining this nuclear weapon and making tests, because you cannot have like just nuclear weapon, you also have to test it. So basically people in developing countries would have less healthcare, would have less infrastructure, would have smaller pensions, because this money would be spent on maintaining nuclear weapon systems. And also nuclear weapon tests are very bad for environment. We know that the places where these tests took place have many people who suffer health issues because of these tests. And nuclear tests are bad for environment. And the more states we have with nuclear weapons, the more tests would nuclear weapon tests would take place in the world, which is very bad for marine life, for human health, for nature. Also, we believe like if you have many like countries with nuclear states, that means they use uranium, and uranium, besides of nuclear weapons, is also used in nuclear plants. So the cost of nuclear energy will rise dramatically. That means that the cost of nuclear energy would be similar to the cost of fossil fuels. That means like people would prefer to choose fossil fuel instead of nuclear energy, which is again in its turn very bad for environment. Now, I want to rebuttal the argument of our government, who said like, oh, like there would be more if more countries have nucleus, there would be more regulations there, but they didn't explain us what is the purpose of regulation. Yeah, we would have regulation, so what? What is the purpose of regulation if it can be broken at any moment when country faces the risk of attack? So now I want to compare the closing, just to make some comparison between closing opposition and opening opposition. So closing opposition told us we don't need nucleus because we have diplomacy, traditional weapons, and stuff like that. But actually we have explained to you why having more nuclear weapons in the world is bad for the security and is bad even in a situation when countries actually don't use these weapons to defend themselves. And once again, I want to stress that if the countries have nuclear weapons, they still actually wouldn't be able to use them because of the fear of being attacked back by this country or by other countries. So thank you.
Woo. I'd like to thank the speaker and call upon the government whip.
Hi. Is my voice clear?
Oh, now it's much better.
Okay, thank you. So the main point of our debate is not every country will develop nuclear weapons. They don't have enough money. They don't have enough experts. First point is that small countries that don't have controversial weapons have the right to defend themselves. Large powers have a lot of influence, and they want to impose their views because they fear that someone will become too strong and they couldn't control them. The third thing is why weapons matter. It matters to make you feel safe. No one will use nuclear weapons because of the possibility of mad. This will be regulated. There will be no misuse. In countries with nuclear weapons are perceived differently on the global stage. For example, USA, Russia, Pakistan, and France, etc. For them, having nuclear weapons give them the power globally on aspects of economy, politics. We also believe that all states have the right to own and have a nuclear weapons, whether they develop it or not. And we also should mention that it changes the power and the status of a nation, because countries with nuclear weapons are treated differently on the global stage than those weapons. For example, North Korea have only dozens of nuclear weapons at the best estimate, but their demands are taken with an extra level of seriousness and secret, because there is a desire to avoid such a conflict. When all states have the right to have nuclear weapons, that will give the country the power globally, and it won't be a unique feature for specific countries. And speaking on the long term, speaking on the long term, that will help other countries in the world to contribute in more in the markets and more in politics, and also will help improving global economy and distributing the power. The last thing I want to mention, that all states now have a way and a very strong protection that would prevent other countries from attacking and controlling them. Thank you.
Woo! I'd like to thank the speaker and call upon the opposition whip.
Madam Chair, in this debate, we have seen several layers of shallow argumentation on what have happened in the 20th century on the nuclear disarmament and self-defense, right? Like two observations on what actually happened in this debate today. First of all, I believe that there has been several points that raised by in the first top halves, which is actually quite contradictory to the debates and the very question of the debate. The core question of the debate today is to whether is to have the should all states have the right to have a nuclear weapons? I mean, unlike the opening opposition, we are who say that all states should not have it. We are saying that not all. In closing opposition, we are saying that not all states should have a right to have a nuclear weapons. Right? Several points that has been mentioned that we think that it would be clear to pinpoint them. First of all, we say that in the first top half, the question of self-defense is boiled down when me and my teammate prove to you that in most of the countries which are dysfunctional, those countries, and also those countries that have dictatorships, when these countries do not have this check and balances, when these countries do not actually co-opt punishments to officials and do not really have legislation that actually works, puts people into prisons that have violated in the high top officials, they are less likely to be honest, less likely to have proper means of using their power, right? Just as in the case, me and my teammate have actually responded to you. What are those incentives that are provided by the prime minister and the whole government bench actually? So we are also saying that this specific case of actually we are also proving to you that we are not going against and principle. We are not unlike the first top house. We are also saying that Geneva Convention of 1973. Actually, there were some breaches, right? There are some breaches, and why we should not grant this specific right to all states is because there is already states like Israel, states like Iran, states like North Korea already possess nuclear weapons, not being part of the Geneva Convention, not being part of the Non-Proliferation Act. We are principally stating that, this is principally wrong, even if it's not going to be used, even if, the very existence of nukes is dramatically harmful for those states. Several things that we have mentioned, and that I am going to analyze, right? First of all, we are also saying that principally conflicts, the principle of weapons have been used in the warfare, right? In those cases, in some cases, when states are prone to fight with terrorism and terroristic attacks, especially weaker states like Afghanistan, which actually Afghanistan or Iran, right? They previously used indirect methods of armies by Hezbollah or Hamas or by other terroristic organizations, right? Right now, what me and my teammate, we are proving to you that there are more likely to be risks when these states previously did not possess the nukes. Now they possess it, and now they can actually use these nukes by these indirect methods of terroristic organizations, and they are more likely to be prone to use that, or they are more even the very existence of the weak states allows all the other states not to engage with the diplomatic means and peace talks, right? Because we have already seen that we can already see that these are very rare chances of diplomatic discussions that is in here, right? We are also saying that allocation of resources in these small states are actually prioritized and will have to be prioritized, even if it's not going to be used to labs, resources, military defense, and conserving those nukes, right? We are also stating, unlike the top house, we are also stating that these effects is going to is likely to create a rhetoric where you will hear that these in these weak states that through media they'll get the message that these societies are unstable, and are unstable in terms of that you cannot actually you cannot freely live on your life, and you are always prone to be insecure. You cannot actually send your children to school or invest in some businesses or engage in some communities, and you have more incentives to leave that weak state, which is weak into to disagree to collaborate with other states and have and the very idea of having nukes in all the states is going to be harmful to massive population populations who have no incentives to engage in that like political and political area. And several points that have been also mentioned, right? We are also we should also not mention, yeah. Why? Yeah.
No, order.
All right. Okay. In conclusion, we say that nukes are not a currency to power. We say that we have already mentioned to you that the other means of conserving conserving military defense is more likely to be useful than having nukes. So this is the end of my speech. We are proud to oppose.
Woo! I'd like to thank the speaker and all of you. Don't necessarily reflect in the eventual score, but I think could help you in future debates such as this, then the ranking, rationale behind it, and a bit of personal feedback for everyone. So I guess the first thing that such as this is that, as you've seen, this debate is phrased as an analysis debate that asks us, do countries have a right for nuclear weapons? And I think here, while some of you do notice this element in the phrasing, you don't always make all of your arguments then prove the truthfulness or to falsify this claim. And what do I mean by that? So some of the arguments that were made were more in a practical sense of this does harm, this does good, and so on. But here I think what was needed in the motion is to take this a step further and explain why, even if you have a practical case or a principal case and so on, why should they tie into this means that every country has the right to or doesn't have a right to. So does the right, for example, delineate from the potential for self-defense? Or does the right stem from the risk that this might pose, therefore there is no right? Or does the right come from conventions such as the Geneva Convention or not? And then what should be the reason that we deem a country to have a right or not to have a right? So ultimately, what you want to ask yourself is, even before all of the practical understandings of what actually happens, is what does this mean to have a right to do something, and then why we should or shouldn't give. Now, based on that, you can then ask yourself, okay, so if each country has a right, what would be the outcomes? If I have a country, I have a right, they have a right, and they have a right, what would happen? Would it be everyone? Who would use it? And so on. But the question before that is, why should we give a right? Or who should we give a right to? And here, what you need to do is show why there is either a universal right for everyone, or there is no such a right. So I think that is something that could have helped everyone in the debate. The second thing that I wanted to notice, and here it wasn't necessarily something that influenced the debate as much, but this debate is not devoid of context in the sense that already today there are countries that have nuclear weapons, And there are conventions such as the NPT. And there are, at least in the status quo, attempts to stop every country that is not a part of the NPT from developing nuclear weapons. And I think that this understanding and knowing who has nuclear weapons and the world is fine with that, who doesn't have, and at least the superpowers are trying to combat that, can help you then make a stance as to how you view nuclear weapons. So I guess here, if you are a side government, you can say, considering that some countries already have nuclear weapons, we think that this should be a right for everyone else as well, and then make the debate more about that. Opposition can decide on whether they say no one should have a right, period, even those who currently possess, because it's not a matter of right, or they should say we are sort of fine with looking at this on a need-based or accepting status quo, but we don't think that it gives others a right to use it just because this situation happens. But then I think it really helps you understand, okay, so what really changes, who might gain nuclear weapons, what do we feel about people that currently have, and so on. And also it would make your case a bit more accurate in the sense that the United States has nuclear weapons, China has them, France has them, Israel, India, Pakistan, and so on have them. So then I guess it can potentially help you. The third general comment that I would give is that many of the claims in the debate lacked a bit in normative value. And here I mean the explanation of why, if you think that something happens, this is good or bad for your side. So for example, a lot of you use North Korea as an example, and you say either on government, well, now people would take them seriously, or on opposition, you say, well, now people would take them seriously. And here you need to explain why this is good or bad. So if you think that this is really good, that countries now have a way of, I guess, using nuclear weapons to their advantage, is that a good thing? If you're on opposition, is that a bad thing? And here it's up to you to show, because as a judge, I can be convinced that maybe it's good that everyone has the ability, or you can convince me that bad people, bad countries shouldn't have that, and that would be really bad, and then I would be persuaded by that. But you need to show me for everything that you say why this is something that should be either really good for your side or really bad for the other side. So I guess try and think about that as well when you present your case, and don't just assume that this is automatically good or automatically bad. So that's in terms of the general feedback. Then in terms of the eventual rankings and the debate, so this debate turned out to be ranked according to the order of the speakers, in which the first place goes to the opening government, then the second to the opening opposition. Oh, sorry, it's not exactly that. So first goes to the opening government, then second goes to the opening opposition, then third to the closing opposition, and fourth to the closing government. So what are the reasons for that? I would start from top down. So between opening government and opening opposition. So here, basically the case coming from opening government, if I have to shorten it, is there would be countries that feel really threatened and they would try really hard to have nuclear weapons, and this is something that can give them a certain protection, and this protection would be done through the mere threat of them using the nuclear weapons, which would create mutually assured destruction or some sort of deterrence for their interest. And they also try and explain why the same logic that applies to why those countries would be able to gain in security is also the same logic that would be applied as to why countries would not use the nuclear weapons, but only use this as a threat, with giving certain explanations on the case of dictatorship. Now, here, what the opening opposition does is it tries to, in a sense, mitigate this effect on security, saying that there are other measures. However, this is not necessarily mutually exclusive with the part about the nuclear, meaning that they can use other things as well, but this doesn't necessarily mean that they shouldn't or don't have a right for this type of use. Then they say that using nuclear weapons is something that is very dangerous to a country, and it's something that can cause its elimination. However, here opening government agree that countries shouldn't and would not use the nuclear weapons, but simply hold on to that, which is something that then answers the point about whether this would be used for the better or worse. Same applies to the number of bombs that you have. So here opening opposition tries to mitigate and say, well, you might not have a lot of bombs, and here opening government says, well, even if it's not a lot, it still creates the same effect, and therefore this type of, I guess, benefit stands up to the opening government. Then what are the other things that the opening opposition tells us? So here I think that there are interesting cases that the opening opposition makes. However, they either don't analyze them enough, or they don't show why these are more important consideration for the determining of whether this is a right or not. So the first thing is the idea of the Geneva Convention, which I think is really interesting. However, you tie it to a bottom line that is a bit weaker than you could have had. So you say that what we should infer from the Geneva Convention is that we cannot guarantee that the superpowers would not use nuclears. However, I'm not sure that this is exactly in the scope of the clash as it is happening in the first half. And you simply say, well, this is a part of, but you never show why we should adhere to the Geneva Convention and so on. So I accept that it might be a consideration, but it's not necessarily proven to be the consideration or a more important one than the deterrence or the small countries one. Then you say we would rather use diplomacy, or there is no need, but here you ignore the fact that opening government at least shows a need for someone, and that the fact that one would prefer something does not mean that they don't have a right to do the other thing. You also try and say that this creates a tension on diplomacy, which is really fascinating, but this is only a one-liner in this speech of LO. So unfortunately, I cannot credit that since there is no analysis there, although I think it is a good idea, and it is something that can potentially help the opening opposition. And then there is this idea of this might harm the feeling of safety, which I get that might happen, but once again is not weighed when compared to countries have a right to self-defense, and this might be used in that way. So all in all, it seems that the case coming from opening government still stands, and the other reasons coming from opening oppositions are either not clashed enough or not explained enough in a way that makes them better than the case that we're getting from the opening government. Then comparing between the two teams on opposition. So here, when looking at what the closing opposition gives us, so they also tackle the point about dictatorships and the risk coming from having one country that can go rogue, or terrorism, which I think has potential, but is not explained in a much better or more significant way than the opening opposition. So here I think, had the CO shown more why the mere risk of having this one country, or why we cannot, when we rule on a right, take the risk off, and then work more on, I guess, showing the equation of how we weigh the risk and how we weigh, let's say, the benefits coming from, could have helped. But given the analysis that there is a sentence about we don't want to take the risk, but then not further analysis coming from what we already hear from the opening opposition on this question. Also relying to the point about terror. Then I think that CO have another really interesting idea that O also hint at but don't prove, which is the more countries use or proliferate nuclear weapons, then the higher the risk that we would have a conflict. I think it's really interesting, but unfortunately it stays at this level simply with the analogy of the highway, but no explanation as to why, when it comes to nuclear, we would have this situation and why we have that risk. So then it is an idea, but it's a bit underdeveloped in order to stand fully and show why this happens in this debate. And then there are other considerations to citizens and the environment, which I think are done relatively well. However, you don't show why these are more important considerations than the considerations coming from the opening opposition as to why this shouldn't be right. So here, even though it stands, it's not necessarily something that weighs the debate for you or wins an existing clash. So it's something that is a damage, a harm, but not necessarily a better harm or a harm that is more linked to the lack of a right in order to beat your opening opposition. So I guess to sum things up between the two teams on opposition, we have one point of clash which is important but not analyzed in a much significant way more than your opening opposition. Therefore, you cannot be credited enough for doing a better job on that point. Then another really interesting point that is not analyzed, therefore cannot be credited for you. And then other points which are substantiated, however, are not better than the opening opposition in trying to win the clashes in the debate and proving the motion to be wrong, and therefore you are ranked below them. Then when comparing between the closing opposition and the closing government, so here closing government, I think that you start your speech in a way that at least I found to make a lot of sense, to start with giving the context of the world and the fact that some countries already have and so on. But then using this point of very clever framing, you eventually only give 1 point, which is a bit asserted, or at least the logical link between the conclusion that you have and the rest of the analysis is a bit lacking, in which you say in status quo there is a difference in how a country is perceived based on the fact that it has nuclear weapons. Therefore, if everyone has a right, this would improve the economy and would help the economy of countries that have nuclear weapons. However, notice that this is not necessarily a logical conclusion automatically stemming from this idea, meaning that you need to show why having nuclear actually makes you a stronger economical player and so on. But more importantly, why the fact that now small countries can have an economical benefit means that every country has a right to do that, which is something that you don't prove enough, but is indeed at the heart of the motion. So then when I compare you to the closing opposition, then you have 1 point that's not substantiated and not linked enough to the motion, unless that have more points that are analyzed, and at least some are more within the clashes in the debate as it occurred. Therefore, their contribution to the debate is larger than your contribution to the debate.